The wind swept dry dust across the canyon floor as Colt Maddox rode his chestnut stallion. Down the narrow trail, the sun burning hot above the ridges, the leather of his saddle creaked with each step, and the jingle of his spurs broke the silence of the mid-morning heat. Colt's face was stone-weathered, proud, unreadable. He'd made this ride 100 times before, collecting debts across the frontier. Money was owed, and men like him made sure debts never went forgotten. The plains stretched wide before him, endless and empty, broken only by the outline of a lonely cabin sitting crooked against the horizon. Its roof sagged like a weary old man, smoke barely rising from the chimney. A few chickens scratched near the fence, too thin to bother running from him. Colt's jaw tightened. This was where Samuel Ward had lived and died, still owing him for the herd he'd never paid for. As Colt drew closer, the faint sound of laughter drifted through the air. It was light, fragile children's laughter, the kind he hadn't heard in years. But before he reached the gate, the laughter cracked and turned to crying, soft and sharp against the wind. Colt paused, reins tightening in his gloved hand. Something in that sound pierced through the hard shell of the man he'd become. He looked toward the cabin again, dust swirling around him like ghosts of memory. This was supposed to be a simple visit, one of business and numbers. Yet, deep down, something told him this ride would cost more than money. It would cost a piece of the man. He thought he was. The year was 1886, and the land itself seemed tired. Dust rolled across the plains like ghosts of lost dreams, coating every fence post and window pane in a dull, hopeless gray. The Ward homestead sat miles from the nearest town of Red Creek, a lonely patch of earth, surrounded by brittle sagebrush and the whisper of the wind. The cabin, built by Samuel Ward's calloused hands, leaned slightly to one side now, its boards warped from too many winters and too little care. Inside, Evelyn Ward moved quietly through the small room that served as both kitchen and living space. Her black dress, faded from washing, brushed the rough plank floor as she stirred a thin pot of stew, mostly water, and a few potatoes. 5 children huddled nearby, each pair of eyes reflecting hunger and trust. Though the world had taken much from her, her husband, her comfort, her rest, Evelyn's faith had not yet cracked. Each night she whispered a prayer, believing that somehow, someday, help would come down that lonely trail. Colt swung down from his horse, boots sinking into the dry earth. He brushed the dust from his coat, straightened his hat, and walked up the narrow path toward the cabin door. His knuckles rapped firmly against the weathered wood, the sound echoing through the still air. A moment later, the door creaked open and Evelyn Ward appeared, pale, weary. A baby balanced on her hip. Her eyes, though tired, still held a flicker of dignity. Colt tipped his hat, his voice low and even. "Ma'am, I'm here on business. Your husband, Samuel Ward, bought cattle from me last spring. He never made payment." The words hung like lead in the air. Evelyn's face drained of color. Behind her, for small faces peeked from behind her skirt, wide-eyed and silent, she swallowed hard. "My husband's been gone near for months, sir. I've nothing left to give." For the first time in years, Colt hesitated. His pride told him to walk away, but his heart-damned thing felt something it hadn't in a long while, mercy tugging at the edges of his resolve. Evelyn shifted the baby to her other arm, her voice trembling but steady. "I can work for it, Mr. Maddox," she said. "I sew for the neighbors when I can, and I can cook or clean for your men if need be. I won't have my husband's name remembered as a thief." Her words carried quiet strength. Though her hands shook, Colt's jaw tightened. "It's not about names, ma'am. It's business. I don't run my ranch on pity." His tone was firm, but his eyes betrayed him, drawn to the worn shoes on the children's feet, the patched quilt behind her, the way she stood tall despite it all. Evelyn nodded slowly, dignity holding her together. "Then you'll get nothing more than the truth. Samuel meant to pay, but God took him first." Colt turned toward his horse, the wind lifting dust around his boots. Yet as he walked away, the echo of 5 hungry eyes burned deep into his chest. The storm rolled in without warning, dark clouds swallowing the last light over the valley. Thunder cracked across the plains, and the wind howled through the canyon like some angry spirit. Colt had taken shelter beneath a rocky overhang, his horse restless beneath the pounding rain. He told himself he'd wait it out, ride home by dawn, and forget the woman and her hungry children. Business was business, and pity never paid a man's bills. But as lightning flashed over the ridge, he caught sight of a faint glow in the distance, a lantern, flickering weakly against the storm. It was coming from the ward cabin. Then came a sound carried on the wind, a child's cry, thin and desperate, swallowed quickly by thunder. Colt froze. Something inside him, buried beneath years of dust and pride, stirred awake. Before he could think, he was in the saddle, pushing his horse hard through the rain. Mud splattered his coat as he reached the cabin and saw water pouring through the roof. The family huddled beneath a quilt. The smallest child lay pale and burning with fever. Without a word, Colt dropped to his knees, covering the leak with his coat, his rough hands trembling as he poured water and whispered, "Easy now, little one." Easy. The storm passed, but Colt didn't leave come morning. Something in that cabin had taken hold of him, a feeling he couldn't name, or maybe one he'd long forgotten. The roof leaked no more once he was done with it. He split firewood, patched the fence, and left a small sack of flour and dried beans by the door before sunrise. He said little, and when Evelyn tried to thank him, he only nodded and went back to work. She hated feeling like a burden, yet each quiet act of help chipped away at her pride and fear. The children began to wait by the window when they heard his horse approach. The eldest boy, Jacob, followed him everywhere, asking questions about horses and ranch life. Colt saw his own lost youth reflected in the boy's eager eyes, and slowly, beneath the chill of the prairie wind, warmth began to grow. 3 days later, the sound of hooves broke the morning calm. Jed Harper, Colt's foreman, rode up the trail with 2 ranch hands close behind, their faces grim. They found Colt mending the fence outside the widow's cabin, sleeves rolled, hands raw from work. Jed dismounted, spitting dust. "Boss, the men are talkin'. You've been gone near a week while the herd waits. Folks in town are sayin' the great Colt Maddox is fixin' roofs for widows now." Colt's jaw tightened, the old pride stirring again. He reached into his coat and pulled out the folded paper, the debt note Samuel Ward had signed months before. "This," Jed said, pointing, "ain't charity work. You start forgivin' debts, you'll have every man in Red Creek crying poor." Evelyn stood in the doorway, her children behind her, silent and watching. The storm clouds that once filled the sky seemed to gather again, this time in Colt's heart. Slowly, he looked at the paper, then at the family before him, without a word. Colt tore the note in half, then again, until the pieces scattered in the wind. "Some debts," he said quietly, "ain't meant to be paid in money," and for the first time, his heart felt light. Weeks drifted by, and with them went the last chill of winter. The Ward cabin, once weary and broken, now stood steady beneath the open sky. New shingles gleamed on the roof, the fence was mended, and laughter once again filled the air, no longer hollow, but full and alive. The children's cheeks glowed with color, their bellies no longer empty. Evelyn's garden had begun to sprout, neat rows of green stretching toward the sun. Colt Maddox rode up the trail one morning with a wagon full of seed, sugar, and flour. He wasn't there to collect, nor to inspect. He came as a man reborn, one who had finally remembered what it meant to care for something beyond profit or pride. Evelyn met him by the gate, her hands dusted with soil, her smile soft but knowing. "You've done more than enough, Mr. Maddox," she said gently. He shook his head. "Maybe, but I reckon I'm not done yet." They stood a moment in the golden light, the wind carrying the scent of rain and earth. Evelyn looked at him then, not as the man who came for money, but the one who'd found his heart instead. Now, as the dust settles over the plains and the sun sinks low behind the hills, think on this: what would you have done if you'd been in Colt Maddox's boots? Would you have turned your horse toward home, pretending the widow and her children were not your concern? Or would you have stayed, knowing that sometimes the right thing costs a piece of your pride? Out here on the frontier, a man's worth isn't measured by the land he owns, but by the hearts he mends along the way. So tell me, friend, would you have stayed? In the end, not all debts are written on paper. Some weigh heavy on the soul, debts of mercy, of love, of second chances. Colt Maddox rode out that day to collect what he thought was owed in coin, but he found something far more valuable, a chance to pay back the world in kindness. Out here, where life is rough and hearts grow cold, Even the smallest act of compassion can change everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in kindness.